Welcome to the Employee Advocacy and Influence podcast. My name is Lewis Gray, and my co-host, as always, is Elliot Elsley. And we're joined by a very special guest today, and it's somebody who I've had the pleasure of getting to know over the past couple of weeks and that we've wanted to invite onto the podcast really ever since we started thinking about getting guests on, and that's Roy Sexton. So Roy is the Director of Marketing at Clark Hill Law. And there was a number of things that we wanted to pick his brains about. But first and foremost, Roy, thank you for joining us. Welcome. And how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a thrill to be here. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics with two gentlemen that I respect and appreciate very much. And, the audiences won't benefit from this, but we've had plenty of conversations on the side about Star Wars and movie collecting and comic book films and other things. So I feel like I've met two kindred spirits and made two friends. So I'm really appreciative of it.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. And it goes both ways. And to be honest with you, I think when our founder, Bradley Keenan, hears this episode, he might be envious that he wasn't able to join us because he is probably the biggest Star Wars fan within the company. His podcast, or just office backdrop, has a lightsaber behind him on his mantelpiece. So
Nice.
he's a big fan, to say the least. But Roy, would you mind just giving the listeners a little bit of information about your current role and then your career background too?
Sure. I was born I have been in legal marketing since 2012. Prior to that, I worked in healthcare for over a decade, and long ago, I started my career at Deloitte Consulting. So I've had a few different experiences that I think have informed my present state. I've worked at three different firms. First was a mortgage foreclosure firm here in Michigan, one of the largest in the country. That got me interested in legal and helped me understand that I really enjoy working with attorneys and helping them find their unique voices. That led to work at a small white shoe law firm here in Michigan. And then that led to Clark Hill. We are AmLaw 113, I think, so we're squarely in the AmLaw 200. I've been here 6 years. My role is primarily to help elevate the brand of the firm and the attorneys and practices therein. I have also served as the international president for the Legal Marketing Association. There are about 4,000 of us worldwide who support legal in terms of marketing, business development, communications. So I was really honored to be the president of that organization last year.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for giving us that little bit of extra context there.
Sure.
And to give listeners a bit of context on this episode, something that we often talk about on this podcast is managing employee advocacy programs within regulated industries. But it will often just be myself and Elliot kind of going back and forth on the issues that we've seen and how we've kind of helped to solve them. But ultimately, the proof is in the pudding. We wanted to have somebody kind of bring the proof. And Roy, as we've spoken,
I don't have any.
the proof, I'm sure, will be the pudding. But yeah, it just made sense as a guest. We were super excited to have Roy on. So we're going to be going into a bit of detail on Roy's experiences with employee advocacy, but ultimately how he's steered Clark Hill's employee advocacy program in the direction of success and beyond. So with all of that said, let's get into the episode. Okay, so we like to start every guest episode with what we call like a warm-up section, and it's essentially just a quick fire round of questions. It can be 3 or 4 questions, and they're FAQs that we typically hear when we're having conversations with both prospective clients and clients alike, but generally speaking, just FAQs within the space of employee advocacy. So, Roy, I'm going to put you on the spot here. We're going to go through 4 questions, and if you could keep it to a couple of words or a sentence, that would be amazing. They're deliberately...
I feel seen and shamed. Do
it. I'm sure you'll absolutely smash it. So we'll start with the first one. So the first one is, what's the most important metric you're looking at for advocacy content performance?
I'm going to hedge. There are 2 things. I think engagement is the most important thing. I mean, whether or not anyone's taking any action on your content is the thing you should be most worried about. But I also, probably the ego side, I'm always interested in the continued audience growth. So are they taking action on the content, and then are you continuing to attract new audience and followers.
Got you. Okay. And are you currently measuring cost per click from employee advocacy?
We do, from the perspective of the content we sponsor. I don't go into the overall mix of staffing and what we've invested in our tools overall, but by item, particularly areas that we just launched a video campaign, for example, and we've sponsored that content. So I do look pretty actively at, again, the engagement figure and saying, is the money we're spending driving the awareness, but also is it driving action?
Yeah, that makes sense. I love that. And what is your main objective with employee advocacy currently?
Boy, you want me to give that in a brief sentence. I would say it will always be awareness, ultimately leading to some action, whether it's attendance at an event, follow up with one of our attorneys, or context for a pitch. But when I talk about awareness, I think about that under multiple perspectives, one of which is just the awareness of people in the organization that this content is out there and what kind of culture of which they're a part. That then helps us drive talent retention and talent recruitment. And then ultimately, the awareness of clients and prospects to say that's the kind of organization I'm proud to work with or I'd like to work with.
Got you. And okay, if you could, this is where it gets really difficult.
Ah,
And this is the final one, but it's if you had to choose just one thing, what would you say is the key to employee advocacy success?
okay, if I'm being flippant, peer pressure. If I'm being noble, I would say a sense of community.
I love that. Yeah, and this is always the danger with the quick fire questions. I could probably, we could write an episode and sit and speak about these answers for no doubt 40 minutes to an hour. But thank you for sharing your answers on those. It's always great to get an external take on some of these things. But I guess I wanted to start at the beginning for this episode and just understand what it was that put employee advocacy on your radar. So I was curious to know, when did you first become aware of employee advocacy as a strategy? And then how, if not why, did you ultimately decide to implement a program at Clark Hill?
Again, not being cute, I think if I'm sort of hindsight being illustrative, I feel like I became aware of advocacy as a concept even back when I was in healthcare, from the very moment we started using social media as a tool for engagement, both for internal audiences and then for external audiences and community building. I don't know that I knew about it as capital A advocacy with tools and platforms and things around it until maybe about 10, 12 years ago in my early days being in the Legal Marketing Association. There were different folks who were providing products to firms to encourage attorneys who were a bit reticent to engage with the content for multiple reasons. And so that's when I started hearing people talk about advocacy. It was then always on my radar as something I wanted to explore, but the other firms I've been a part of, there just wasn't the budget or even the scale necessarily to launch. So I was sort of the de facto advocacy platform by modeling the behavior I wanted to see other people exemplify. And it wasn't until we were launching our brand here and we wanted to really level up what we were already doing in social media that we invested in tools around this. And that was about 4 years ago, I think.
That's so interesting. So I've been with Disseminate as a business for about 6.5 years, give or take. That what you've described is like that perfect early adopter. When we were first going out to sales, we weren't even talking to people about necessarily how to track things and all of these kind of niche elements that we know in advocacy today. Every conversation was, should your employees post on social media? It was never anything other than that as a conversation. It was just explaining to people why social media and your employees were two things that could come together. And now it's changed so drastically over the past sort of 6 years, where this is like a must have for most businesses, and it's actually optimizing the process. And how do we do this best? 6, 7 years ago, as you say, it was just hard to get anything like this off the ground. You kind of ran into a lot more brick walls than you would do now, compared to particularly talking to senior directors. I think that's the biggest challenge. 6, 7 years ago, selling in a company's social media page was almost hard enough as a social media manager, and there'd only be one social media manager at an enormous business. Whereas now, totally different ballgame.
And I think we've seen different cultural forces that have helped to that. One, we're just seeing the natural generational evolution that people are now in leadership roles who grew up with social media. They don't see it as a novelty. I also think, right or wrong, the pandemic changed dramatically the way we all feel comfortable engaging with one another, because all we had was what we're doing right now. And, before the pandemic, I don't know that you would have brought me onto something like this kind of, and this isn't social media, but I think just the comfort we have with living digitally and seeing it as meaningful connection has changed. And I don't think we're ever going to go back. And then third, I think, particularly where legal is concerned, there's always been this, and I saw it in healthcare too, this worry. I remember when I set up our first Facebook page for the healthcare system, I was sitting down with the CEO and I was so excited. Jane Mansfield, the actor, was following us. I don't know why. And I just thought that was thrilling. And he didn't. And he said, what if somebody says something bad about us? We need to shut this down. I said, shut down the page? No, shut down Facebook. That didn't happen. But I think that was a kind of mindset people had. And what I said to him at the time, I said, well, people are going to say things about you anyway. They're going to say it in the grocery store. They're going to say it in the bar. They're going to say, in the healthcare systems. Obviously, people are both happy and unhappy with their experiences. I said, this gives us a chance to shape that conversation. This gives us a chance to respond to it. But that was really foreign to him. He saw it as something that needed to be contained. And I think we're past that. I think there are still individuals in leadership roles and organizations you have to work with and around them. But I think then you, as we often say in legal, work with the willing and elevate the people who embrace it and do it well. And hopefully they are in leadership roles as well. And that's where I think the gentle shame, as I mentioned the other day, peer pressure, elevating those folks, anecdotally letting people know within the organization that as a marketing professional, you're celebrating this person who's doing it well, using them as an example. The others come around because it's inevitable. It's not going anywhere. And we've always seen this. We saw this with television. We saw this with the hula hoop. We saw this with MTV. Anything that has come along that feels foreign to one generation is a threat until it becomes part of the firmament. And then they all act like it's been there forever. And why aren't we doing more with that? So.
I've seen that so many times from that perspective. I think the conversation I see quite often, just almost from a sales perspective and years in customer success as well, but you talk to a senior stakeholder, and for our platform, we're often addressing advocacy at scale with, here's the content that we'd like you to share, we'd like you to add your own opinions, so on and so forth. And there's ways that we can restrict that and block certain things if we need to. But the question we often get is, what if somebody says something bad? And what if somebody says something wrong and posts it via this? And my automatic response is, what if somebody does that now? Do you have visibility over it? Can you see it? Do you know what's going on? Are you trying to guide them the right way?
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of mindset shift that I think is really starting to happen with that, which is actually, if we just give people this content, we give them a kind of a guideline to work within, not necessarily strict rules, people will do the right thing and they worry less about it. If you ask them to sort of do it off their own back completely, then you start to tread a different line where you don't have the sight lines over that you might want to previously.
Yeah, and don't manage to the lowest common denominator. Manage to the desire. And I think your point is exactly sound. Those things are going to happen anyway. And I go back to the lens we have is the experiences we had with other organizations. When I joined Deloitte Consulting 1,000 years ago, we went through an orientation, and it was so long ago that, for example, they said, if someone faxes you a dirty joke, what do you do with it? I'm like, fax? Who? Even then, I'm like, who is going to fax? Okay. But the larger point they made was, if you do something that embarrasses yourself, we see that as a career limiting move. They didn't put it in the guise of, you are putting Deloitte at risk. They put it in the guise of, you are putting yourself at risk. So that concept applies here as well. These tools are there. Again, someone could act a fool at a cocktail party, or they could do it online. And that's when the organization needs to have a conversation with that person. But you have to have line of sight on it. And if you don't, then you can't set the example you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Was this ultimately what led you to seek out a formal program and ultimately a tool for your employee advocacy efforts, to know that, people are going to be saying things anyway? In this case, your attorneys will be posting. Is it not better to have sight on it and to actively encourage it so that it's done well?
Yes and no. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm Orwellian in my motivations. Yes, it's nice to be able to track and observe, but there are certainly other ways to do that. If you're as obsessed or prolific as I am, and you connect with everybody in your organization, and you set up the right alerts just organically, I catch and see pretty much everything I would need to see. It makes it easier, obviously. And I think that's an important thing from a governance perspective for people to keep in mind. And if that's part of the rationale you need to offer to get these tools, go for it. For me, when we were launching our brand 4 years ago, I had put a lot of energy, kind of me, myself, and I, just building an audience on our social media up to that point, often in the evenings when my husband and I were watching terrible reality television, and I was just kind of constantly sharing, resharing, posting content on our pages. But it was getting to the point of I needed to elevate myself up and pull out of that and empower the rest of the team to manage that content. We needed to be more curated and focused, and we don't have a CRM at Clark Hill. It's on the plans, but we had to have something. We had to have some kind of audience measurement tool and dissemination tool to get content out there when we needed to relaunch the brand. And without a CRM, without email marketing in a proper fashion, I had to have something. So at a lower cost, we were able to look at these advocacy tools, and we looked at them initially from the perspective of, we've got a good following already because we've done it through blood, sweat, and tears. Now, how can we grow that in a more efficient way? How can we schedule the content to make sure that it's placed at optimal times? And then how can we create more efficient ways of collecting measurement? Not me going in the various dashboards and anecdotally saying, oh, we're doing really well this month here, but to have that all consolidated in one place so I can, at push of a button on a monthly basis, show that to the firm. So that was where we started, more from the needs of the marketing team to get a brand message out. As we were using those dashboards and people were seeing, this content does well, this content doesn't do as well, we were starting to have editorial conversations, because up to that point it was, here's a picture of me at a golf outing, put this on our LinkedIn. And depending how important the person was, we're like, okay. Well, we were then able to demonstrate to them, that content doesn't really fit here anymore. We've got really substantive media coverage and thought leadership and video. However, you feel free to share that yourself. And as we were more empowering people to share things themselves, that's after a year is when we brought in proper advocacy and a platform where all the attorneys and all the staff, we don't limit it to just the attorneys, can download the app on their phone. They get the alerts. They also get email alerts, because different people process information different ways. And that serves a few different purposes. One, again, it starts to put a framework around what we share, when we share, shows them the examples of how they're going to share their own content, the best ways to do that. But it also creates that awareness. Even if the attorney that gets that alert never shares that thought leadership, I wish they would, but even if they don't, there's at least a reminder, oh, I've got colleagues that are doing something else. It's not just my corner of the world that matters. I'm part of a larger firm. So you have to think as holistically as possible when you make an investment in this, and don't get so beholden on, oh, my shares are X, that's how success is measured. But are you starting a conversation across your organization? And now I'm starting to see attorneys, they're creating their own bespoke content. They're not relying on marketing to do that. Does that come with some risk? Sure. But on the other hand, they are now empowered to use these tools to grow their own practices, and they're doing it in a way, again, I can see and have line of sight on, even if it's not going through the advocacy tool, because they're part of the community. And I can give them a thumbs up and go, yeah, more of that, less of that. But I'm turning this into a ramble, and I'm sorry. You want to create controls, but you don't want to be controlling, because that undermines the whole purpose of social media. If people are so insecure and hung up because they think someone's going to be monitoring every action they take, they also won't ever take any action. So you got to thread that needle properly.
I often see this as a stepping stone process. That's one of the ways I've often described this, and I describe it because it links to a lot of our features and things like that as well. But you've got to go one step at a time to get somebody through a social media kind of journey, essentially. There's people that I can call out by name that are users within Disseminate and across our client base that are absolute experts, industry leaders, sort of. They don't necessarily need a platform at all. They just like it because it attributes, and they get exactly that visibility of, I'm the best at posting about my particular topic. What you need is everybody else to be able to follow that same journey to get to that point, and you need all of those ways to be able to get there. Couldn't agree more. It's a tough element, and it's what makes advocacy so challenging. It's because you've got X number of employees that are all at completely different stages of that stepping stone journey. There's not a one size fits all. If everybody presses this button now, you will move to step 2. It's everybody's got to find their own little area.
And you've got to be comfortable with people. Think more. I sometimes liken myself to the editor of a small town newspaper, or perhaps it's a school teacher. People are at different levels of comfort with the technology. They're at different levels of comfort with being that demonstrative. They're at different levels of comfort with being that exposed. And some of them will always be a lurker. Some of them will always post too much. That's okay. But arm them with the material that works for them, and give them different paths. So sometimes I'll speak to attorneys and they'll say, well, I'm not comfortable sharing. I'm not comfortable posting something myself. I go, okay, well, then just react to what other people do. That's still adding value. Again, Andy Warhol said we'd all be famous for 15 minutes, and boy, did he call that. We're now, whether the platforms are also having this sort of, I like when worlds collide. Other people don't. They like LinkedIn is professional and Facebook is personal. And I'm like, I think a good mix and a certain blending. I like mashups. I like people take two songs and put them together and they don't belong. So I like seeing a bit of the personal on LinkedIn. But if you're not comfortable doing that, then don't. But know that you have a client or a prospect and see what they're sharing and at least comment on that. I'll have attorneys say, well, it's all about relationships and I take people to breakfast once a week, or I take them to golf. Okay, you're with one person for an hour or two people for 4 hours, but on scale in 10 or 15 minutes, you can go on there. And if you got a short list of people whose relationships are important to you, see what they're sharing about their organizations, about themselves, comment on it. We all want to be seen. And one of the biggest ways to create a memory on scale and in a very efficient manner is to leverage these tools. It doesn't take the place of taking those people to breakfast, but it's going to be far easier to get them to go to breakfast if you're acknowledging they have a life outside of your immediate needs.
Absolutely. I think a really interesting use case to what you said at the beginning there are some people that they're not ready. The way I always describe it is they're not ready to be Gary Vaynerchuk. They're not going to post 900 times onto LinkedIn over the course of an afternoon. And that's totally reasonable. Like that expectation should never be there for everybody. A client we work with, very well-known tech business that I won't name, but big part of their platform is really about hiring. They want to hire the best development talent out there. Naturally, developers, engineers are less social media kind of interested, let's go with. They tend to be a little bit more off-put by it. They don't want to put themselves out there. As painting with a tar brush, it might be unfair. I know there'll be plenty out there that are very active, but generally speaking, they don't want to post onto LinkedIn quite as much. But what they are more than happy to do is like content, is share content. So when their senior manager, when one of the talent attraction team post out and say, hey, we're hiring for a full stack developer, they're happy to weigh in and just give that a like and know that that's going to kind of bloat out to the rest of their network a little bit more. It doesn't really require a big ask from them. They feel like they're helping. They feel like they're involved. And again, very, very early stepping stone process of or just log in and press the like button. That's all we're asking of you. And if in 5 stepping stones time you feel like posting something, we're here to help with that as well.
I've seen it with my father, for example. My mother passed away in 2001, and he had not been on social media at all, partly because she didn't want him to be. She loved it. She was a bit gaga about all of it. But then he was like, could you set up a Facebook for me? And the first year, and he's in his late 70s, so he was just using it as a way to kind of watch, keep up with things. And I observed we're human. As time has gone by, now he's using stories and he's posting pictures of albums he's listening to, and he's now moved toward sharing content as a means of connecting with people and showing what his interests are. But for the first year or so, all he did was kind of and he was uncertain about what to do, and this happens somewhat organically. But again, you can use advocacy tools. You as a marketing leader need to set the example. You need to be wary of. I get a lot of grief even now from people that will want to offer me critique about the way I use social media. And I'm not the kind of person, but I'll do it now. I have 31,000 followers on LinkedIn. I have nearly 50,000 followers on all of my social combined. Now, there are people who have far, far greater following and far more influence. So I know that for some, that's a drop in the bucket. But for me and where I am in my place in life, that ain't bad. So I know how to use these tools, and I know how to create a mix that promotes the firm, promotes the things I do. And when I'm promoting the things I do, I'm not doing it just to be self-aggrandizing. I'm doing it because people in my life are not only interested in where I work or the boards I'm on, they're also interested in things that are happening in my life. This interview will be something that will draw other people in. As they're drawn in, they're going to hear about Clark Hill. They're going to hear about me. I'm going to throw things out there like we have 29 offices, nearly 800 attorneys. We have robust industry strength, and we have an incredible collaborative team of attorneys that can solve problems up and down the pike for any client. But somebody came along to hear Roy because they know me and they're going to be interested in this topic. And as they're hearing about it, they're going to hear about Clark Hill. Now, those attorneys that will say, Roy, there's too much of you out there. I'm usually not in the room when they say that because they don't say it to my face. They say it to my boss or someone around me. And I have to kind of meekly say, oh, I understand. I don't want to offend them because they themselves never share any content about the organization. They don't engage. Clearly, they're looking at things, but they haven't crossed the Rubicon to actually engage with the content. So I have to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, pray I continue to have a job, but I can't really constrain what I know works as a marketer based on people who don't sit in my chair and don't know the resources that I have or don't have and the limitations I have. And so I have to do what I have to do. And there's a reason why Clark Hill is often ranked as highly on lists such as yours. We punch well above our weight in the AmLaw 200. And it's because, and I'm going to give myself credit, what I've learned myself using the tools. And that I'm willing to engage a broad audience in the ways they want to be engaged, not the way someone might constrain me to do so. So I offer that little soapbox. There are marketers out there that are going to be hearing what I'm saying and say, yeah, but the managing partner in the firm doesn't want me posting anything. And they want to read everything I post, and that's going to happen. You're going to have that constraint. Live into it, but then show them how it can work and should work, and take a leap sometimes. And if you continue to be in an organization where they don't let you do that as a marketer, but you see the promise of these tools because they're not going anywhere, they are economical, they are a way of building a community, they're a way of getting your entire organization to cross-sell, to promote naturally. And if your organizational leadership won't support you in that journey, go somewhere else. And again, not being draconian, but they'll get it someday because your replacement will come in and want to do the same thing. And they'll say, oh, crap, that's just the way of the world now. I have to get out of my own way. That's the evolution that we're on. And it's going to look very different in 3 years, 10 years. I can't even predict what it's going to look like. But we are now digital natives, all of us. And those who have become adept at using these tools are the ones who will be successful in marketing, regardless of the industry they're in. And industry leadership, regulated or not, needs to understand that. You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
I mean, it's something that we so often say here at Disseminate is LinkedIn is essentially now the world's largest networking event. It's free to attend. There's hundreds of millions of people there, prospective clients, you name it, anybody that you want to get in front of. To say to them, don't say anything. I mean, to echo what you've said, Roy, it sounds draconian. It's,
Yeah, and you're
it's
cutting your nose off to spite your face. And these are the same people that will want to spend $45,000 on a cocktail party that reaches 110 people, half of whom are people who already work in the organization. When we reach 12 million a year, our video campaign has already reached 3 million. Now, where we continue to struggle is the granularity of that. Are they all the right people? We need to get more sophisticated in that, but at least in terms of creating brand reach, because what I heard when I got here and the problem I was solving for is nobody knows who Clark Hill is. They'd grown through combination and acquisition, and there were a lot of regional firms that didn't want to let go of their old names, but didn't understand why anybody didn't know that they were currently Clark Hill. They were still using their old firm name because they said, well, people know that. Okay, well, you yourself have to change your own LinkedIn to show, but that's a digression. So I focused really hard on, okay, you want people to know who you are, and you don't really want to put a lot of money into it. This is a great way to do that. Now, people do. People like you look at us and say we're employing a lot of best practices. You put us on lists. That wasn't happening 6 years ago. So, let your marketers solve the problem the way they know how, with what resources they know how, and don't constrain them unnecessarily. I think the other point, I keep dancing in and out of my head, and I'll just throw it out here, apropos or not. My early days as a marketer, we would talk often about hub and spoke. It's probably not as popular a concept, but back then it was always the website remains the hub, but you have to create spokes for people to find that content. Obviously, search engine optimization, AI, other things have kind of disrupted that sort of linear perspective. But I still have people within the organization that think good marketing is creating a subpage on the website. Okay, great. That content is there. I see that differently. I see that as an opportunity just to collect our thoughts and say, well, what is this that we're doing? No one really cares about your subpage on the website unless you drive people to it. And that's, again, where social media serves you well, and creating an advocacy program where your own people, and I mentioned this a second ago, and I want to hit the point again, I will hear people in the abstract and leadership meetings go, we need more cross-selling, as if it's something you go buy on a shelf and force everyone to do, as opposed to creating an intellectual curiosity in your organization and an awareness of everything they have going on. So on a just-in-time basis, that's where I can't be. I can't be at every event, meeting, conversation somebody has to know that the attorney will remember in that moment when someone says, oh, do you have somebody who does cybersecurity? But if I've created enough awareness through the content that we have that, they will have that top of mind. They will do the cross-selling naturally. Then they can come back to our team for pitch proposals. And so then the hub and spoke strategy is really, it works in a number of different ways, but continuing to drive people back to where your central house of content is.
And it doesn't even require that sort of cross-selling element. It's something we talk to clients about so regularly, which is you're actually just trying to be first thought of mind, basically, for people. I'm looking for somebody that deals in cybersecurity law. Do you know what? There's that person that posts on LinkedIn all the time about, I think, that topic, if I recall rightly. That's all you're trying to get people to do. Yes. And it's the same principle as Lewis said, going to an event. Oh, somebody did a talk on this. I'm going to go talk to that person because they did a talk and I know that they're an expert in it. It's the same principle, and it's just getting people to that point. I think you're, fortunate and unfortunate in the sense that the industry that you're in is typically slower to adopt probably tech compared to some of our early clients that I won't name by name, but typically more kind of forward-thinking businesses. They're kind of trying to break boundaries in different ways as businesses. To me, it presents a massive opportunity in the legal industry. The tech companies, they get this. They understand why this works. They're all doing it. You see reports every other day of people that are creating TikTok campaigns at this point to try and hire Gen Z into the businesses and things like that. But for law and legal industries, a lot of pharmaceutical industries, places like that, this is just a gold mine that is just completely untapped at the moment.
Yeah. And I would also suggest, I hear this sometimes. Attorneys will say, "I know what my clients want and how they want to engage with us." And I'm like, "Do you?" And they're not that. My clients aren't on social media, and I'm like, "I'll go look, and I'll highlight for them." Actually, they are. And if you want to be respected by the company you're pitching, you might want to look and see how they're employing social media. And don't attorneys, and again, I sound like I'm biting the hand that feeds. Maybe I am. They tend to get nervous when other attorneys are teasing them about something. If your competition is teasing you about something, you probably need to do more of that. And quite frankly, what your competition in legal is doing is not what you should benchmark. Sometimes we'll say law firms like to be first to be second. Was another law firm doing that? Don't look at what your competition is doing. Look at what your clients are doing on social media and try to meet that, because their internal culture is accustomed to these tools. They're consuming this content. And if you want to position yourself as, and all firms do, we're a progressive, tech forward, blah, 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 and then you go to the profile of the person, they don't even have a picture. I'm like, that's where peer pressure should matter. It shouldn't matter in what I wore in the office today, but it should matter in terms of what clients you are aspiring to retain and capture. And furthermore, what talent you're hoping to bring in. Look at what they're doing. That's where the peer pressure should be employed. And I would suggest to marketers, when you can, create those synopses, is that a word, for your internal folks. Yes, do a synopsis of here's the marketing stuff we have done on behalf of the organization, but periodically, doesn't have to be fancy. And there are organizations like yours that can provide these kind of comparative tools as well. Pull in what your competition is doing, but more importantly, who are your top clients? And do an assessment, do some screen grabs of how are they using social media? What are they doing? Do they have an advocacy tool? And I think that's going to get the attention of your internal audience, because they will aspire to be like those organizations because they want their business.
It's actually something that I wanted to ask you about, and this, you've just touched on it, but scaling your program, once you got this thing off the ground, how did you build awareness internally? Did you have to go through that process of building these synopses and offering training for those who are a bit more apprehensive?
It's like street fighting. It never ends. I think one thing we haven't done, and I challenged the team on this, and I think it's a bandwidth issue, we have not done, which I think is the nuclear option and will make all the difference, is publish a public dashboard of the top 10 people who are sharing stuff. We haven't done that yet. I look at it. Now, the problem is I'm always number one, and I'm not bragging. I obsessively share things multiple times. And if it comes to our advocacy tool, I'm like, I share it. So I said to the guy, when you do this, knock me out. I don't want to be on the dashboard. I'm a super user. But there are 10 attorneys, many of whom are on the executive committee, and we haven't done it yet. And I might in January go, we are doing, because as a leader, I tend to go, I've empowered the team, do what you're going to do. Here's a suggestion. And I let it ride. And then I finally go, okay, we're doing this. And they're like, so that's the one thing we haven't done that I think we need to. Beyond that, I do things like this. I talk about what we're doing. I don't have these conversations necessarily with folks inside the organization, but when nice people like you come and say, what's your strategy? I'm like, let me tell you, because I know people will watch this inside the organization and go, well, if people outside are interested in what our strategy, maybe I should take that interest as well. I send around emails when someone has had a success in this regard, or we get something anecdotally that someone is using the advocacy tool or they're sharing content. I make sure that gets sent to the C-suite. We have an internal portal. We share content there. A lot of what we do in the internal portal is we link back to the LinkedIn post versus, say, the news item on the website to get that awareness. And again, the disruptive nature of the advocacy tools themselves. When we have some breaking news, like we don't use it all the time, but if we've done a combination, we've got a high profile lateral that's come on board, we've gotten in the Wall Street Journal or something like that, I will say to my person, I said, send out that, because we can do the weekly digest, but we can also send the, hey, hot news, and it goes out as an email and a notification to everybody. So we do all the things that we possibly can to create visibility on it. The other thing we do, like clockwork, is my colleague in business development and I, and we're going to do it later today. We do it monthly. We have a lateral orientation for all the new hires in the organization. we go through everything we do in business development marketing. There's a big section on social media, and we follow that up with every new hire. My colleague that runs the advocacy piece, he sends an email to all the new hires and says, here's the link, here's how advocacy works. I'm happy to sit down with you and go over it. So we might not get the folks who've been here for 100 years, but everybody new coming in. So that's a technique as well. If you can't necessarily persuade folks who've been in the organization a long time to care because they've already built their books of business, they don't think they need this, fine. Mel Robbins has this wonderful thing I see all the time on Instagram. Let them. If your friends don't invite you to brunch, let them. We obsess about the people who don't do the thing instead of focusing on the people who will. So let them. But with everybody new coming in, they think this is something we've done for years and this is an expectation. And so with time, they're talking about this, and that person down the end of the hall that's like, I don't need that, when they hear it from me, but they hear it from 20 new lateral hires, many of whom they want to be successful because that was a big recruit for the organization. They're like, gosh, I love this advocacy tool. Then those people are like, what is that again? Well, let me show you.
That's music to my ears. That's it's such a conversation we have, and I think we've actually had on the podcast probably a couple of times, but trying to convert people that don't have a LinkedIn profile picture, that have 3 followers on LinkedIn, that's resource intensive, and your time and energy can just be so much better spent with the people that are interested or a little bit more interested or are apathetic and they're not sure exactly how it works. They're going to get you so much more value than trying to convince this one person that's staunchly against it that this is for them. And if you can do that, and then over time, exactly as you say, it's just you reach a saturation point is what I tend to find in a lot of businesses. And we've got some businesses that, have got to a point where 95% of their employees are signed up to the platform. And they may not all use it every single day, and that's fine, but 95% of them are signed up. And that's just over time, it saturates in the business where everyone goes, well, if everybody else is doing this, I am clearly missing out on something. And that is just time more than anything else. Find the kind of low-hanging fruit.
And I don't always fit in with my fellow legal marketers. They are wonderful people. They're perfectionists by nature. They have mostly grown up in these organizations. I have not. So they feel like anything that's missed, anything that's not perfect, anything that's not completely aligned is a mistake. I don't. I'm too messy for that. So, we still have people on our website that have never taken a proper photo. Some people will be like, every attorney has to have a photo, and because they don't all have a photo, I'm like, they didn't want to have it taken. And so we've said, this is our branded photography. We are not putting up your 8th grade high school or your 8th grade graduation photo. If you didn't take the branded photography, you don't have a photo on the website. And we've held the line on that. So there are going to be people on that website that will never have a photo because they don't like having their photo taken. They claim they're too busy. They can't get to it. I realize it's a digression from the social piece, but it's an example of what I'm talking about. So yes, your measure at some level when you're launching these tools should be how many people are involved, how many people are adopting it. But don't let your measure be, if you don't get 100%, it's failure. You're always going to have 20, 30% of the people that don't want it at all. Another 20, 30% that probably signed up for it just to be nice. And then the rest are actually going to use it. Fine. Let them use it. Let other people use tools that work for them. But over time, it becomes part of the institution. There was once a time, my first firm, I remember one of the partners on the executive committee said, do we even need to have a website? And I was like, what? So you're going to have those people. They grew. And if they, and again, the business model of legal probably should have started with that, because if other people aren't in what the world I'm in, they'd be like, what is he talking about? I'm not selling Nike sneakers. I'm not selling movie tickets. So marketing doesn't really get any credit for what happens. We are to create a toolkit, and I'm good with that. The credit comes from the attorney who's building their own book of business. They have their own goals that are assigned to them around how many hours they bill a year, and that as they move up the chain, that number increases, and how many new clients they bring in. They get the financial credit for that, and then the documented credit for that. I don't. So I have to create those opportunities for each of those individuals to figure out how to grow their business in the way that works for them. So we have a universe of things that they can. We've got podcasts, we've got social media, we've got video, we've got thought leadership, we've got media relations, and we work with each one to figure out, well, what is their mix that works. But the point I want to get to is some of those folks who don't want to adopt social media because they're in leadership roles, they're in leadership roles because they've already got a very established book of business. And they did that in a different era with different requirements and different things that work for them. So don't chase them to get them to do social media. They don't need it. The challenge in law firms is most of those people in leadership don't understand the things that the people who are growing in their roles will need. So they sometimes force the marketing team to engage in marketing activities because they like them. They're historical, they're tradition. And you're like, why am I planning this big holiday party that nobody wants to go to? Because this partner who already makes a lot of money and does very well is in a leadership role and is going to mandate that. Whereas I could take those resources and work with the other people in that office and say, how do you want to grow your books of business? Is it this holiday party that the managing partner really loves, or is it some other, but that's one of the challenges I always have to navigate. And I'm not begrudging about it. It just is what it is. So that's why I like social media, because it wraps around that. And the nice thing about social media is that thing that partner really loves, I can still push it out on social media and he or she can feel really good about it because we posted images of that party and maybe a nice comment or a quick video clip of someone attending saying, so now you're bringing that person into that world. You're celebrating something that's important to them, but you're turning it into content that actually at least tells a story about your culture.
It makes me think about this is something you and I spoke about recently, Roy, the pyramid of employee influence, just a piece of content that we put together a few years ago that still holds up. But it's, for the listeners' sake, it's essentially identifying 5 different groups of employees that are typically found within every organization. And it's essentially just giving you pointers on where to start when you're launching your employee advocacy program. And in the middle is the people who are motivated to impress. And that's, generally speaking, where we say to start. And it sounds like that's exactly what you've done to kind of maximize your adoption rates by making it part of the onboarding process. You're not going to get anybody that's more motivated to impress than somebody who is new to the business. So I love that. But I'm curious to know, though, Roy, from your perspective, we kind of touched on this towards the beginning, but what does employee advocacy success look like to you at Clark Hill now? What's been one of your biggest wins as well?
Numerically, we've had redunculous audience growth year over year. So I love that. The ego, it loves to see that, we have seen such strong growth in followers, engagement, and reach. But who cares, right? Those are marketing metrics that I enjoy. I would say what I love to see, and this is just how I'm wired, it now is just happening. I've got a colleague, Ted Degenhart, who is in construction. I hope I didn't get that wrong. I often do. But he's creating these long form posts weekly with a nice image talking about at a very accessible level. It's not an alert that general counsel needs to review. It's just him using social media almost as his weekly diary. Here's what I've observed as an attorney, and he gets great traction on that. And so when I see that, I share it to the firm page because I'm like, that's great. Let's see. Now, Ted's not using an advocacy tool. He's not sharing the content of the firm. It's completely antithetical to everything I just described. But great. And this will make many law firm leaders' blood run cold. He's out there using this in an active and engaged way. I'm hoping and believing, informed by what our advocacy efforts have done. And now he's I'll sometimes say you can't play jazz music until you learn to play the scales on the piano. So I'm presuming he's seen and been part of our efforts and work to date. And now he's playing jazz. He's doing his thing and it works well. And I, as a marketing person, I like it, but I also want him to know I saw it. I liked it. I'm commenting on it. That, again, if Ted's watching, he won't. I don't want it to seem like I'm monitoring Ted, but that's a way of also, if people hear that and go, oh, people are posting things and it's not going through marketing, how do you? Well, I do know. I saw it. I commented on it. And if you run something that I think is a bit out of field, I'll call him because he knows I have the credibility and I know he's doing good work. And I can go, Ted, I saw your post. Hey, here's a little thing you might want to tweak. You probably didn't know that. Again, you're the coach. So I don't know that if I've answered your question in a way that is satisfactory, but when you start to see the organization just, this is in their bones and their DNA, and they're comfortable, and lawyers are comfortable expressing themselves. There's another attorney, Ray Koenig, who was just on a kind of public access TV program talking about his journey with, I think it's a former federal judge. I can't remember that's hosting this thing, but he's now at ease. Is that as a result of the advocacy program? I can't draw a direct line to that, but I now see attorneys that are not calling me to go, oh my God, I'm going to be on this thing. What should I say? How should I say it? They are just doing it. And our CEO said to me a few years ago, and I think he's probably forgotten, he said this to me. He was watching what I was doing on social media in my early days, and he goes, and he wasn't CEO yet. He goes, I love the example you're setting for the other attorneys because you're out there visibly, and I think that's going to take hold. And I think it has. So to me, I don't want to put you guys out of business, but one of the most successful things you can see in an organization is that you might not need an advocacy tool anymore because people are just doing it. But then that gives you the opportunity to come in and go, great, they're doing it. Now, how are we measuring it? How are we giving them templates? There's always another level of support that an organization like yours can provide. But you're out of the realm of convincing people to do it. Now they're just doing it. And that's fun to see.
That's the dream, right? That's ideally if you walk into a business as a marketer and you go, everybody creates authentic, unique content that's speaking to an audience. You're living in a utopia as a marketer in that kind of world. But that is the goal. And I see that. I think it's interesting when you sort of talk about the successes that you've seen. You've referenced probably two of the three things, and arguably all three of the main sort of pillars that I tend to see as successes. ROI metrics, pure marketing. Here's a really big number that tells a story that will really speak to marketers, but may not speak to everybody else in the business. But then you've got the cultural impact to the business. Well, people are just better educated all of a sudden. People know stuff about the industry that we didn't necessarily think they knew off the back of their own sort of work. Having that sort of cultural impact to people, then to be able to say, actually, I'm willing to talk about this stuff online. I'll put myself out there. I don't just need to be in a conference room battling against another attorney to throw this information. I can talk about this socially a lot more. And then the big other one, I think, that you kind of flirted with almost is just anecdotal evidence of, this person won some business off the back of a LinkedIn post because somebody found it interesting. Somebody came up to them at an event and said, hey, I saw you talk about X, Y, or Z, or whatever it might be, and I saw you post this on LinkedIn. Those are the three big success metrics from my perspective. Every platform can talk to the ROI and the metrics, but the other two elements, those are super internal.
And it is like gold. And they don't tell me. They often don't tell me. And that's fine. But when I do hear it, I run the wheels off of that. Anthony Camphouse, an attorney that has said now many times in public spaces here at the firm, we did a video for our automotive and manufacturing team. I think it was last year. And he has said, I think it was a prospective client saw that and said, well, I really want to work with you guys. And I'm like, now they saw it. And that's the other part marketers have to understand. I see a lot of legal marketers do that. Even in LMA, they're like, I'm having a webinar. Okay, well, how'd you tell anybody about it? So we created the video. Nobody cares unless you then use these channels to push that video in front of people. And then I see, even in the team, they'll go, well, the paid metrics aren't the legitimate ones. It's the organic ones that matter. I'm like, no, they both matter. Would I love it to all be organic and viral every day? Sure. Is that going to happen? No. So with that video, I go, we invested the money to make the video, the time to make the video, Now we want to make sure people see it. I'm not going to rest on my laurels and go, well, I sure hope people share it. I'm going to put, like 300, but not a lot of money on this. And I can go, this audience, this geography, this title, this age bracket. And I do it on Facebook too. And everyone's like, oh, Facebook. I'm like, yeah, because law firms aren't doing this there. So again, people own businesses and have legal problems on Facebook. So I may as well go for broke in both places and for a minimal investment. Now, again, this is outside of your realm of advocacy, but it all rolls back into the metrics and things I look at. So yes, we alert them through the advocacy tool. Please share this video. We hope they do. But I'm not going to rely on that on something as crucial as a campaign video. So now I'm going to advertise it. And that's going to make sure it lands in the right places at the right time. And presumably this person that Anthony said saw the video, more likely than not, saw it because we had done what we'd done with it on social media. So you got to stop thinking compartmentalized, start thinking like retail marketers, start thinking like consumer facing marketers, and pull some of those techniques in, because law firms aren't doing that. They're too worried, nervous, rigid, whatever. And the legal marketers are trying to satisfy the internal audience at the expense of connecting with the external one.
I think you see that so much with attribution, right, these days. But talk to any marketer and everyone's got a different way of attributing. There's first touch, last touch. We've got W-shaped attribution. We've got this, that, and the other. We've got ampersand, and they're just endless processes. End of the day, people see a lot. The more people see what you're talking about and your content, the better. I think.
Yep.
I go back 6 years talking to clients about this, and one of the big concerns a lot of clients had, because they'd go from 0 employees sharing effectively to maybe 300 employees sharing. We're seeing too much. We can't. There's way too much content going out, and I haven't heard that for 2-3 years. And partly we've got some really cool things going on in the background that help with these things, but I don't hear that because people don't consider that a problem anymore. And that's just that shifting dynamic for people.
It never was. My first firm, and this is it, in my brain, and it relates to what you're saying, but others might say, what is he talking about? But for internal communications purposes, I was helping this firm in that regard as well. And the office manager at the time sort of fancied herself that person and just wasn't doing it. So I had created an internal newsletter for marketing stuff and started including other things in there. And she came in my office, and I'm a theater person, so I imitate people, forgive me. And she said, Roy, you've included that message a few times and people are tired of seeing it. And I said, well, Peggy, when they're tired of seeing it, that means they finally heard it. And this was an organization of like 200 people. It wasn't like, so fine. And I think also the platforms, the marvelous and frustrating things with all these platforms we're using is you got to have your brain playing 3D chess. There's your internal audience and the management of content. There's working with a platform like yours to then make sure it gets in the right hands. And then there's the moving target of the platform itself that is evolving based on use and evolving based on people like you who are helping us work better in that system. So once upon a time, if you had 300 employees all share something at the same 10 minutes, it would look insane because it was in the news feed as everybody at Clark Hill posted the same thing and had the same language. Well, now they have course corrected where that gets consolidated down and it shows 93 people from Clark Hill shared this, or you're only going to see it from the people who are getting the best reaction. So it actually works in your favor the more people who are sharing it. But you're right. And again, it's one of those things where people who don't understand how these tools work are worried that someone is going to think badly of them because there's so much stuff out there. Do you think Disney worries that people are going to think badly of them, that there are too many ads for Deadpool and Wolverine? Or that too many people are wearing t-shirts on the street for that movie? No. They're like, great. We've created such awareness of this, everybody will have to buy a ticket. But somehow, because it's our organization, we get a little shy. This happened to me. Boy, we should just file this with HR after we're done. At the height of the pandemic, this gentleman, Tommy Franz, I've referenced him in the abstract, but he's a marvel. He's a journalist by training, and he sort of took on, and really, I'm the old man now in the corner. He's like, Roy, let me handle this. And he's done a wonderful job. But he had this great idea. And a lot of people started doing it after. I sound like some political people here, but we did it first. I don't mean to sound that way, but he said, what if we start posting our four-legged coworkers of Clark Hill? And I said, sure. And he goes, I'll do it on Facebook. I said, no, do it on LinkedIn too. Why not? This was at the height of us all sitting around in our pajamas hoping we could get groceries delivered at the house. So he started doing that. And this went on for like 3 months. And this is in the early days where we didn't quite have the following or anything we did. People were coming to our page, of course, pictures of dogs and cats. And he would do a wonderful write-up. He'd talk about the attorney and what their practice was, but how this was helping them through this moment. And it was doing really well. And we were then having leadership in the firm say, here's my dog, here's my cat. Well, a member of the executive team called me and said, Roy, are we putting dogs on LinkedIn? I said, yeah, we have been for about 3 months. Shows me you haven't been looking. And he goes, well, one of our attorneys was attending a bar event, I presume on Zoom, and someone at another firm was teasing him that we had dogs on LinkedIn. And so he called me, because that's what happens. Somebody calls the director of marketing. They go right to the, And I said, you're probably right. We shouldn't be putting dogs on our LinkedIn. So they had a conversation without me, apropos of no context, no understanding of the traction we were getting, the impact it was having, and decided because a competitor thought it was silly, we shouldn't be doing it. So I said, and I'm not wise enough not to talk about these things, but I'm wise enough in the moment to say, you know what, I hear you. That makes a lot of sense. We're actually on our last week anyway. We were. And I said, we have 2 executive committee members and 1 office member in charge whose animals will be posted this week. And that'll be the end. Oh, okay, that sounds good. And I left it at that. But we learned from it. We learned some wonderful stuff that insinuating a certain amount of the personal works. And at that point in time, it was differentiated. It was disruptive. But working in the environments we work in, sometimes you're going to run afoul. And that's where I think, again, the marketers say, oh, okay, I'm glad you're paying attention. Appreciate that feedback. And take the win and then learn from it and then move on. But, you're always going to have those kinds of moments where, again, well-meaning people who don't understand what you're doing give you advice, and you have to figure out what you're going to do with that based on their level in the organization. So
100%. And Roy, I really hate to be the one to have to say this because I feel like such a buzzkill, but as we're coming up to the 1 hour mark, I wanted to jump in.
I mean, I'm blah, 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 blah.
No, we always appreciate it. But yeah, all good things must come to an end. I suppose I should have led with
including my career.
Well, we have a very talented post-production team, so perhaps we can get some things.
I'm good. I'd rather talk about these things openly and have them be helpful to other people, knowing that many of the people I discuss will not watch this. So.
Well, the final question I wanted to ask you, Roy, and this is something that I kind of wanted to touch on at various different stages in your employee advocacy journey, to be honest with you. But just thinking about the program as a whole, from pre-program launch to the phase when you're scaling it and trying to build awareness to continued management now, what has been your biggest challenge today?
Too many cooks in the kitchen. Too many ambivalent cooks in the kitchen. I'll have people say, some who are in roles of authority, well, I don't understand social media, but okay. And then the challenge is my personal one, not because I put too much of myself in my work, I personalize it, and then it hurts my feelings. It really does. There'll be times I go home and I'm like, I don't want to do this. I'm tired of being the advocate for something that people who don't understand want to tell me how I should do it. I run into that almost daily. So I just try to keep a sense of humor. I try to use these moments of like this as therapy. Thank you. You saved me $150. And to talk these things through, and also to understand, what the organization is ready for, the organization is ready for. Again, work with the willing. I'm my own worst enemy. I can give these pieces of advice, like work with the people who are willing to work with you, pick your moments with this, don't challenge the people that don't get it. But I struggle when someone comes to my door that has not been involved, has not expressed interest, and suddenly wants to give me advice. And that is a struggle for me. And I don't know that that's the answer you were looking for, but I don't really struggle with the mechanics of this or the why of this, or even getting the organization to buy into it. I find the moment to say, okay, you didn't want to invest in this. So let's invest in this. So those all weren't the challenges I had. The challenges were of a personal nature, having people fail to realize the potential here when I'm sitting on top of all of it going, I wasn't going to do this. I just bought this sign for myself for the back of my door. And it says, I don't know if you can see, nobody notices what you do until you don't do it. And that is going to be the bane of my existence my whole life. I'm sitting here going, wow, we're doing amazing stuff. People in England are coming and saying, could you tell us about how you're doing things? And I still have people inside the organization that feel like it's a threat or they're uncertain about it. So I just have to find my peace with that, and keep moving forward.
To offer you some solace there, I have launched hundreds of employee advocacy programs, and that is not a brag, that's just a point of evidence at this point. Without fail, every successful employee advocacy program that has grown substantially within a business has typically had a central owner similar to yourself who's been banging the drum from the very early doors and grown this to all of a sudden a very, very successful advocacy program that's having a lot of impact in the business. And without fail, across that growth, people from all sorts of different departments, all sorts of different areas of businesses, and I'm talking huge automotive businesses, I'm talking massive telco businesses, all the way down to smaller agencies and things like that, have somebody that comes out of the woodwork and says, oh yeah, but I'd really like to do this my way because I think that would really help me. It's a sign of a really, really successful program. And that is the thing I would really take away from that, because it's people wanting to ride the coattails of it as quickly as they possibly can, but just add their own little twist so they can say, actually, I brought this process in. It is nobody's favorite thing to deal with because it's yours and you built it up and you were the one banging the drum at the very beginning with 3 people sat around you. But it's actually a really, really impactful thing to hear from my perspective, because I hear this working with some of these big brands. They say, oh, all of a sudden talent acquisition in Brazil really wants to be involved, and they're adamant that it has to be done this way. And you get to go, that's great. That's great. There's a whole new area of the business that's interested in this for whatever reason. They're wrong about whatever it is their thought process is, but let's point them in the right direction. Let's show them the evidence that we've done. So
great.
It may be your challenge, but it's a really, really positive note from my perspective.
Thank you for that. I really do. I appreciate that.
I think that's a lovely place to end, and thank you for that answer, Roy. Honestly, that's so insightful. But thank you, most importantly, for coming and joining us today. Honestly, the initial conversations we had were so great. I wish we could have recorded those and released those as podcasts as well. But I appreciate you taking another hour and a half out of your day to sit and chat with us on the record.
Happy to do it.
I'd encourage all listeners to go and follow Roy on LinkedIn and on across social media. Like Roy has said, there's people on Facebook who, run businesses who are also interested in law. So give Roy a follow. And yeah, all the resources that we spoke about today will be in the show notes. But Roy, thank you again, and we'll see you all very soon.